Today's conversation is with a former consultant and youth ministry director who has since gone on to fight for safer online spaces for kids and families. He's the founder and CEO of Protect Young Eyes, an organization that has been in the fight for online child safety, a big player, raising awareness, pushing for greater digital safety for our kids and families. Chris McKenna, thank you for hanging out with me today.
I can't wait to talk to you, Mark. This is awesome. Thanks.
Chris, is that like the coolest intro that you've ever gotten?
It is. I am going to clip. I'm going to clip that, and every other podcast I have, I'll be like, nope, stop. I got something. I'm going to email it to you. Here we go.
Just roll marks. I always enjoy trying to make that look as seamless as possible as I'm reading it off of my notes. But I feel like I don't need notes to chat with you because this topic is one that you and I have discussed so many times.
Yeah.
The idea of online digital safety for kids and families. It is such a massive umbrella that affects screen time. It affects phones in schools. It affects access to, harmful material, CSAM, child sexual abuse material. It affects AI and the rise of deepfakes. I mean, there are so many threads to everything that fits underneath that umbrella. How did you get started in this space, being this advocate with Protect Young Eyes? Because this is not something that you have always done.
Yeah, it's certainly in the intro, you listed off a couple of things that have nothing to do with what I'm doing today, right? And I mean, that list
or maybe
you're
they
going
contribute
through,
to it.
And they do. I look back and I clearly see how the Lord wove some of this stuff together for me in a way that I could have never imagined. But, to add to the list you just gave, it's all of those things, and it's kids, and it's teenagers, and it's adults, and it's grandparents. Like, there is no one that is immune from these kinds of issues, which makes it a bit of a wicked problem, right, that we have in this world. So, I mean, how I got here, Mark, I was 12 years in business risk consulting. I loved my job at Ernst & Young, those Sarbanes-Oxley, Enron days of helping businesses not become the next one that was in the news. That was my job. I'd go into big companies, interview executives, come up with a plan to prevent fraud and extortion and all these things. I loved it. Great job. But I was called into ministry, and I'd been volunteering with my wife, working with teenagers for a number of years at the church we attended. Decided to go into that full time, which is a pretty radical change from what I was doing, but that's what I felt the call was. And the timing of that, Mark, is what really sets up where we are today. So I left E&Y in 2009 and then had my job in student ministry until 2017. Okay. So you think about it, that's the rise of portable internet. That's when we decided to carry this with us as a society and then hand that same device, the iPhone. What I started to see was the iPhone 5 showing up in youth ministry in around 2012. That's what kids started to bring. And parents simply had no idea because we all believed it was good and positive. The marketing was doing its job. Mm-hmm. But in the back of my mind, what was shaping this more realistic view of what was going on was I had struggled for years because of an early childhood exposure to pornography with my own compulsive use of pornography as a young adult, young married man, had come through that, had worked through all of the destruction that wrought on my life. Then years later, watched us put that same monster in kids' pockets and thought to myself, what the heck have we done? We just gave seventh graders 100 million people and 100 million choices, which led to some education at my church. That led to launching protectyoungeyes.com as a website in 2015 and a number of things since then. I went on to work for a software company called Covenant Eyes after ministry, which is a pornography filtering company. Loved working for them, helping hundreds and thousands of families be accountable online. But then about 2.5 years ago, decided that this was the gig. This was full-time, what I was being called to do. And Protect Young Eyes is now what I do. But I can see how that, right, when you talk about online creating safer digital spaces, to me, that's the same mindset that I was trained on as a professional, right? Because you've been a businessman for a long time. You can't eliminate all business risks. There are too many variables, but there are certain things you can do to prevent problems, detect problems, and deter problems through business process and procedures that you bring it down to a spot where we're pretty sure we're going to catch everything. To me, the same is true in how we parent in the digital age. I can't guarantee that your kids or my kids aren't going to stumble into something, send something, share something, But I believe there are certain things that we can do in our homes that mitigate risk to a place where you lessen the probability. So I can see where I was prepared for that as a consultant, and my love for families and ministry, and now applying all of that to this issue seems to be what I was called to do.
Well, you're really good at it because I've seen your presentations before. Very dynamic. You've got the PowerPoint slides, which are it's slick, and not to say there's not substance there, but I mean, it's a very professional presentation that really grabs the viewer, and I imagine that's extra helpful when it comes to, one, making sure that your business model is viable, but two, really selling messages that stick, because when you are a parent trying to navigate this world, I mean, I listed off a bunch of the threats before. I didn't even get to the tip of the iceberg, really. There are so many different aspects, but I feel like you have done a good job of kind of like step 1, step 2, step 3, and really putting this in a way that a family can leave interacting with you, whether they see one of your talks or an interview given online, and feel like, okay, I feel empowered to do something.
That's really important to me because I have felt the despair of not knowing what to do in the face of certain forms of technology. But then there's that consultant, that problem solver. I've always been a see a problem, fix a problem. I've told people that have worked with me for many years, together we can almost fix anything. So I'd rather know bad news early than good news late. Why? Because I feel like if we bring it to the table, even if it's an obstacle, we can probably find a way around it. And that's been my approach to these issues too. We know that there are problems. Let's not just wallow in fear that the internet is horrible and broken. There are parts of it that's true. But I want to show families what they can do step by step, chat by chat. What are the things that I believe, when done persistently and consistently, Mark, bring that risk down and increase the probability they're going to have a kid who makes awesome online choices. That's my hope.
I've talked a lot about my wife's work in this field, and that's how you and I got to know each other. And I think it's one of those deals where the lean-in factor when these topics come up at dinner parties or with other parents or PTA meetings or Little League games or wherever, it is almost like 100%. Oh, tell me more. People want to know more about, when do I give my kid a cell phone? Should I let them on social media? And I think that people are waking up to the risks of
That's right.
online dangers and cell phone access and all that kind of stuff, because like you said, we all just assumed, oh, it's safe for me, it's safe for them, and Apple says it's good, and the whole 9 yards. Do you feel like the tide has turned? Anxious Generation comes out. You've got countless documentaries kind of highlighting some of the risks. Do you feel like people are waking up to the need for making sure their kids are safe online?
I think so, because of some of the things that you mentioned. Mark, I tend to dissect society into layers. This is no surprise to you because you've seen in my presentations, that's how I tend to talk about things. It's diagrams and flowcharts, and how do I make a left brain CPA understand it? That's kind of the way I see the world. Society has what I call sort of 5 layers that should be doing work to prevent egregious harm to childhood. You have what happens at home. You have what happens in schools. You have places of worship that have a role. You have policy, which also loops in law enforcement because they're enforcing those policies with laws and regulations. And then you have the companies creating products, goods, and services, right? All 5 have a responsibility to be doing certain things to prevent harm to children. At least we should be as a society, a good civil society, right? And so what I feel like are, yes, each of those layers is waking up at a slightly different pace, and all of them are waking up. I think homes are, because of books like you've mentioned. I mean, the work that the Anxious Generation has done through Dr. Jonathan Haidt, just to up the IQ of average parents around the harms, has been unbelievable. And I love that. He's, created a voice and just a louder version of what a lot of us have been saying, from a smaller platform. And he just had a spot where he could just say these things, and it's really good. So I think homes are figuring out. I mean, I don't know whenever people are going to be listening to this, but Mark, in the last 6 months, the amount of angst that I'm seeing at the school level with ed tech, that parents are starting to really push back on not just getting personal devices out of schools. Like, that was almost the easy part. The hard thing now is, how do we get all of the lessons that are online through Chromebooks and iPads and these school issued devices? That's the one that is like wildfire right now that you're starting to see wake up. And, so I could keep going down, honestly, government's the most frustrating, but we're seeing layers figuring this out.
Well, and that's, I think, why there is that lean in, because you are playing whack-a-mole with all of this. Yeah. And I remember reading about AI education technology that can really create a tailored experience for an individual kid. And you think, oh, that's compelling.
Yeah, that seems great.
I can see a lot of use cases for that. And then you see the research about how kids actually learn when they're on a screen and learn from AI or don't. Yeah. And you think, oh, okay, maybe not so much, but you realize, like, there are trillion-dollar companies, there are 100 billionaires who are heavily invested in making sure your kid gets on that device and learns that way. So it's an uphill climb, but I do think the tide is turning for a lot of reasons. You mentioned the Jonathan Haidt book. We talked about that. Also, you're seeing not just in legislatures and in DC, but court cases that are starting to hold tech companies accountable as well. Yep. So it's a big boulder. People are pushing up the hill, but it feels like there's some momentum.
It does. And the courtroom doors being flung open, Mark, I can't overstate how significant that is. In America, liability has always been the great constraint to irresponsible capitalism. That's just always been the way we've operated. We innovate, we go after, we build, we sell the heck. I mean, look at the Industrial Revolution, and whether it was sugar or oil or whatever it was. Then we figure out, okay, we're harming people. We don't have right regulations in place. And then, you peel it back. You can even put what's happening with social media right now kind of up against the whole tobacco playbook, which is often done, big tobacco. And, the fact that we've got a couple of wins now, kind of back to back within 24 hours of each other, with Meta in New Mexico, and also, through the social media trial over in LA, which I make I'm a nerdy Star Wars guy. To me, those two cases were like the Sith Wayfinder, which sort of shows the way for other legal precedent, right? Because it wasn't going after the content, which always gets messy with the First Amendment, which I respect, love. But this was, okay, you're harming consumers with a faulty product. This is consumer product law. And that's a whole different angle that now you've got hundreds, maybe thousands of cases that are like, hey, let's go.
Yeah. I think it's easy for you and me to kind of nerd out on some of this discussion because there's so many elements to it, but it's easy to get inside baseball as well and just assume the audience knows about all of this. And I think that, I'm somebody who even had my own kind of wake up moments about the risks and about the way we should approach it and think about it. I remember I was doing an interview with an opinion writer for the New York Times who said, there are no other products that we market and sell to kids and give kids access to that we have not tested for safety, except for these phones, these apps. Yes. And that was a frame change for me because it's a good point. We put ratings on the video games and the TV shows and movies that kids watch. Why do we not on YouTube? Why do we not on apps or, hold makers more accountable for that? That's a good point. One thing I want to talk about, the idea that, parents, you need to monitor your kids. And people kind of wave their hand as like, well, that's just it. Just monitor your kids and that would solve everything. And that's a seductive perspective, but I don't think it tells the whole story. One, based on the reality of parenting. Two, that do we want it to be where kids are at the whims of whether or not their moms and dads are paying attention? Don't we want kids to be safe no matter who's watching them? I would hope so. And three, the reality of what tech companies and device makers and app software developers are doing to capture our kids' attention. I feel like as a parent, this is, again, an uphill battle.
Well, and I hate the name for even the thing that we're using. Think about what the phrase parental controls. It's a seductive term and a destructive term at the same time, because I think what it sets up right at the outset is a us versus our kids dynamic, which I think is actually relationally really destructive. And it also at the same time, I think gives this false sense because of the word control. It implies to a parent that if I get it right, I've done my job. That's it. A set it and forget it kind of mind frame. So or mindset. So I hate the phrase altogether because it harms what I want most, which is the relationship with the child. And it harms what the reality is around how much reliance we should be putting on these things. Tech companies want us to believe that the parental controls that they've put out is all that we need. That's like trusting big tobacco with the filter that we're good. I'm not trusting them, which is why, as you've seen, and, maybe we talk about, there are many other things parents need to be doing. And, I'll just back up and say something that was really offensive in a parenting talk, but I keep saying it. And I think people understand the spirit behind it. I had a mom in a front row of a presentation I was doing, Mark, and she was concerned about her son who was playing with other kids who had devices. How do I handle that? Because I don't know the other mom. Like, how do I handle that? And I said to her, I said, you know what, you've got to talk to that other parent and figure out what the rules are on the device this kid is holding. And just, to me, that seemed like a really common sense approach to this. And she couldn't fathom, because that would be judgmental. How could I talk to this mom about the rules that this other kid would have? I don't want to make her sound like I am judging her for decisions. And I just looked at her and I said, listen, if you're going to choose to have little humans today, what comes with this is you have to understand what devices they have. You have to understand what other kids have when they're with your kids. Like, this is just part of the gig, Mark. And I think that's a hard mindset. We didn't observe our parents needing to do these things. So I think you and I and others sort of in this generation, we are the first generation that has to adopt a whole different set of parenting tools. And it's simply just part of the gig today. It's not just parental controls. It is intentional parenting. And we're the ones figuring it out. We're the ones making the path. So I know it's not easy.
It's tricky. I mean, you bring up a good point, because so much of parenting, for better or worse, is knee-jerk parenting where you mimic what happened to you as a kid. And that can be good, that can be bad. I'm not passing a judgment on that. But you don't have a frame of reference for some of the device stuff, because it is really hard when this is the de facto mall for kids in a way. And this is how they communicate. And kids need to be able to communicate. That's an important part of human development, is communicating, being part of the group, all of that stuff. So it's difficult to tell your kid, nope, can't have it. Sorry that all your friends do. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. And because it's a communication device as well, So that's where you see the rise of the kind of the landlines and some of that stuff where we're like, okay, how can we still meet those needs without going full bore, full access on the phone or whatever. But when it's all said and done and you kind of look at the landscape, what do you think is the biggest threat parents should be aware of? Is there one that jumps out at you, or is that too hard of a question to answer?
Well, I think there's a few, but let me start with one that is more and more being talked about, Mark, and that's just the overall deterioration of being able to pay attention to anything. And this starts at a really young age. In fact, next week, and I know that doesn't make contextually, depending on when you listen to this and so forth, but sure. From where you and I are having this conversation today, next week from today, I'm doing a conversation with parents at a school of 3 and 4-year-olds. It's a pre-kindergarten group of parents. And like the number one thing I need to convince them of is to get all the iPads out of their homes. Because I'm hearing from school administration that kids are showing up for this, kind of pre-K class time. They're only there for a few hours, and parents, as they're dropping them off, are ripping iPads out of their kids' hands that they were watching in the car on the way to school. And now teachers are stuck trying to re-engage these kids, regulate these kids, because you just took all of this quick hit Cocomelon dopamine out of their view. And
Cocomelon.
Right? Yeah.
It's Cocomelon when you combine the two.
Combine the two, that's right. And I think that's just one example sort of in a whole list of One of the great things about being human is our ability to sit and be in relationship with each other, to look at each other, spend time with each other. Even in nature, I love to run, being able to focus and observe and just be present. And technology is the antithesis of presence. It's the antithesis of focus. It's the antithesis of authentic relationship. It takes all of that and cheapens it, erodes it, quick now, fast now, flip now. And that to me it's hard to measure. It's hard to be scared of it because it's not like you see a wound or a harm or, somebody bleeding from something. It's just this slow deterioration of our ability to, I think, do these very human things that we've been doing for thousands of years.
The good news is, on the other side of that, you've got neuroplasticity. And just like you wire your brain, kind of for this level of stimulation, you can rewire it. And I'm no brain expert, but what the brain experts have told me is that it's not that hard if you do it. If you give yourself the opportunities and the pathways, that your brain is remarkable at its ability to do that. It just is far easier said than done, I think.
And it can start with really simple things. I call them micro moves. One just happened today where I had a choice, okay? I had a check that I had to deposit. I had multiple ways in which I could take care of this, Mark. You can take a picture of it and just do it electronically. I could go through the outdoor little in the tube, suck it up and do it that way. Or I was passing by, a branch of our bank. I wasn't in a hurry and I chose, it was an intentional decision of my will to go inside to deposit this check.
Nerd.
But the things I learned about the two tellers there as I walked in, deposited this simple check, about the one who remembers going to the bank with her mom. I can remember the name of the bank she told me, and the Tootsie Pops that she used to get as a young girl. And I got this whole story. Right. This is just, it's maybe a dorky example, but I mean, if we want our kids, if we want our kids to understand the power of human to human connection, what it means to talk and have a conversation with somebody else, I think we miss out on so many rich opportunities, little conversations that not only are good for us, but who knows if that person needed you to say hi. There's just so much missing when we don't even look for those moments at all.
No, and it's funny because the whole premise of social media and the phones and all that stuff is new ways to connect, and yet it's not the ways that I think humans most need to connect. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because I see, as an adult, I see many of the benefits, but if you don't have the safety there as well, I mean, I think that's the key. I was interested to hear the Armchair Expert interview, Dax Shepard, his podcast when Jonathan Haidt was on.
Yeah.
A few big takeaways that I enjoyed. One, I think it's also the awareness. It's really easy when it's online to be like, oh my gosh, my kid saw something they shouldn't have. For me, that's not a sky is falling moment. It's an opportunity to have a discussion about something and have some education. And now we can tie it to something that maybe we saw. And let's talk about why that's not what we want to see all the time. But he was talking as well about the reduction in the teen pregnancy rate and teens drinking and all this kind of stuff. Dax brought that up as kind of evidence of hey, these kids are doing great. And Haidt made the argument that was really enlightening. That's an indicator that these kids are not getting out and testing the waters and finding the boundaries of life and asserting independence. Those are skills you need to learn how to do to navigate the world as an adult. And it might be less expensive to do that when you're a kid as opposed to when you're an adult. And no one wants, a high teen pregnancy rate or drinking, driving, all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
But he's arguing that by not getting out and riding your bike and not scraping your knee, you're not learning how to exist in the world effectively.
Yeah, these are unintended consequences, right? We've traded off here, I think, one for the other.
Sure.
And there's a lot of complicators there, and I'm certainly no expert in this. Dr. Gene Twenge, for those that are interested in just some of these, societal shifts when it comes to teenagers and the percentage who do and don't get jobs now. the percentages around kids who put off getting their license like forever. They're afraid to drive. Like all of these sort of rites of passage that you and I remember from childhood. She's done a lot of work there that I think, those listening to this and watching this might be interested to dive into. Now, I'm not here to say that that's the cause, that the smartphone is the cause for all of those things. Sure. It's a complicated web of issues that I think we need to consider. So I don't want anyone to mishear me on that, but it's hard not to go, gosh, there's a little smoke here. Let's pay attention to what's going on. If kids are constantly not physically around each other, yeah, these things are great, but what kind of adult is this teenager going to become? Right? Most of the things that matter most in life, marriage and relationships and a good job and working on a team, these are all things that are hard and very relational, involve a lot of friction. And if you've had a friction-free childhood because of technology or whatever it looked, you're not prepared for any of that. One parenting guy that I listened to, a social scientist, he said, whether you're a bear or a boy, as a mammal, in order to become the most resilient adult version of bear and boy means in childhood, you've got to stumble and bumble your way through that thing. You have got to experience friction, some resistance in order to know how to handle the harder things coming, which actually works against, as a parent, what do you want? You want your kids to be happy. You don't want them to skin their knees. You don't want them to be left off of a team. You don't want them to experience this hardship. And yet, those are all the very things that prepare them to be the type of adult that we truly want them to be.
Man, I could not agree more. That doesn't mean it's easy for me, but theoretically, I agree with that. And we've had a lot of conversations in our household lately about hard things, and anything worth having is hard, and doing is hard, and learning is hard, and all that kind of stuff. I think, countless examples, but also failing and how you learn more from that experience than you do from winning sometimes. Or even something as simple as when you are getting your class schedule for the upcoming school year and you didn't get the good teacher. Maybe that's a great thing because you're going to learn something from that experience by virtue of having maybe the teacher you didn't want to have, because if that doesn't happen when you're 10, you're not prepared for it maybe when you're 25 or 30.
Yeah.
So all of those things, I think, kind of fall into that bucket and kind of, again, work with this big umbrella that we're talking about.
That's right. That's right. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that live on a device make kids happy. And so it almost weaponizes this instinct we have as parents, because my kid's happy. They're over there. They're not crying anymore because I gave them an iPad, right? They're, not complaining anymore because I gave them Snapchat. Gosh, that kind of feels like I made the right choice as a parent because I've got a happy kid, right? That's the kind of wicked dynamic here that I think it's easy to get circled up in. And to your point, yeah. But we've sort of traded off, one set of issues for another that we'll see later on instead of right now. So,
yeah, I want to go back to the mom you mentioned sitting in the front row that was worried about coming across judgmental for that other parent, because I don't want to be that way with what I've learned about handling devices and other people's decisions. But I almost feel like maybe there's a muscle here, or a perspective that you've got to really challenge yourself to embrace. And it's that what you just described, thinking something's good because it feels good or is good in the moment, and really pulling back and saying, well, what's the big takeaway? You talked a minute ago about going into the bank. And I remember seeing an online bank a number of years ago that had, I think you got 0.25% or 0.5% more in their savings account by moving your money there. And I thought, well, that's great, 0.5% more.
Yeah.
But there's no branch in my city. That means there's no tellers that work there. That means there's no maintenance person who comes around and cleaning folks at night. That means that doesn't, we lose out by me getting that 0.5%. Obviously, big picture, a lot of layers, all that kind of stuff. But once you see it that way, it does change your thinking. And once you see maybe it feels good for my kid to have the device for the ride to school, and you're like, oh, maybe not so much. And where I really see this is that idea of phones in schools. Because if you ask educators who the biggest or what the biggest obstacle is to getting rid of phones in schools, I've heard time and time again, it's the parents, it's mom and dad.
Yeah, it is.
Want their kids to have those phones.
They want access, right? We've through Life 360 and other apps, we just want to know kind of real time all the time. Tell me, moment by moment where my kid is, what they're doing. And if I lose access to that, it kind of feels like I've chopped something off that I can't have that anymore. And, schools, I think, don't always do the best job of this, but with the right messaging, town hall conversations, the why, prove you got your emergency preparedness plan in place, talk about why it's not a good idea for a bunch of kids in the middle of a school emergency to be on their devices, distracted, notifications going off, alerting the wrong people as to where a room full of kids is, right? All of creating chaos with parents who are all showing up and clogging the arteries, both through the phone lines and just the physical roads to a school. Because when you step back and think about what having that access all the time could do, I think you have a better chance of convincing more and more parents. But, I think the evidence is there.
Yeah, the evidence is there about the distraction that phones present in school environments. Even if it is in the backpack, turned off, there's still a little piece of your brain is thinking, my phone's right there. Should I check Snapchat? Anybody message me?
I know.
But you're right. It comes up time and time again. The biggest obstacle, I think, for a lot of parents, they talk about the idea of a school shooting. How do I get in touch with my kid?
Yeah.
And but those experts will say the last thing you want is a kid running around a school holding something in their hand, and a police officer isn't sure what that is. Just I shudder to think about some of the ways that can go sideways. So, switching gears just a bit,
okay,
because we could go down. I mean, I've got so many topics listed here that I could get to, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention your book, 5 Habits of the Tech-Ready Family, coming out in June 16th. For folks who listen to the podcast before then, I think it's pre-orderable on Amazon as we speak.
Yeah, anywhere really. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. This is what have I learned in 10 years in conversations in preparing this? And by the way, Mark, I have a whole new respect. If there's anybody listening to this who has written a book, mad props to you. I will never pick up another book again and not just have total respect for that whole process and what that looks like. Having gone through it and read the same manuscript 150 times and pulling your hair out, looking for semicolons. But, I spent, we went back through 5 years of direct messages and emails from parents that I've received, hundreds and hundreds of back and forth conversations, trying to find those, what I call kind of in the trenches moments, and weaving those in to these principles, these 5 principles that we've kind of boiled, those practical things. We started off by saying, I don't just want to be the organization that says the sky is falling, the internet's horrible and broken. We want to be the how. Okay, if that's real, how do we exist in that reality? And that's exactly what these 5 habits are. But it's rich with examples, like copy and paste. I had to go to each one of these individuals, some who I haven't talked to for 3 or 4 years, and actually get their permission to include. So this is real, authentic conversations with mostly moms, some dads, but a lot of moms who are often the ones in charge in a home of protecting their kids. I call them the chief technology officer moms. They're the ones who are often doing the daily blocking and tackling when it comes to keeping kids safe online. And we've spoken to thousands and thousands of them, and I've heard their pains, have heard their successes, and I wanted to make sure to share, because that's, I think, where we sometimes can get the most help, when you understand that you're not the only one. I mean, there's a principle in that too that I think goes back to that mom who was pushing back on the idea of talking to that mom of the friend of her kid who maybe would sense judgment if you ask questions. What I've experienced over and over again, Mark, is actually the exact opposite. So author and leadership expert John Acuff, a guy who I've known in ministry for a long time, he wrote a book that talked about the gift of going second. So his context around that was, if you've experienced some hardship, when you have the courage to share about it publicly, others who have experienced that hardship receive the gift of going second to your courage. And what I have found in the digital safety space is often when you're talking to other parents about these digital issues, often what happens is they look at you and you go, oh my gosh, I agree. They just didn't know how to begin the conversation. They didn't know how to not sound like they were foolish or unsure or uneducated about this thing that they didn't really know how to start. And if you do, what parents have come back to me and said over and over again is, oh my gosh, they were so relieved that they agreed with all the things that I was saying. They just needed me to go first. And so I hope that the stories in the book give parents some of that courage to go, okay, I'm not the only one. I have a model, someone that I can follow, that I can do these hard things to.
I think, though, that speaks to the idea of coordination on some level, because to go back to your example of that mom, boy, that woman is getting brought up a lot today.
Yeah.
If your kid had a peanut allergy, you would not hesitate to communicate that to other parents. Hey, listen, if Jimmy's so excited about coming over, would you mind? He's got a peanut allergy, and we are really careful about the foods he eats and once he's around. Can you help us with that? That's an opening point, I think, if you want to tailor that to the devices. Is, hey, we don't have phones at our home, and they're not on YouTube. Can you just make sure they don't get on YouTube? Whatever it is, I think, and then you open a conversation. I think most folks would be surprised at how receptive other parents are to. Yeah, we probably are on it too much. I'm happy to do that. And then now you can talk about it.
Yeah, we've got a whole section where I go through the types of questions that we can practice asking that sound as minimally judgmental as possible. So for example, if, and I think just in general, Mark, we live in a time where we know fewer of the parents of the friends of our kids than ever. And I think we got to get back to some of that, knowing the parents and the families of the kids that our kids are hanging out with. I think that just helps, again, mitigate that risk. And then when it's time to have that conversation, a simple question like, hey, what are some of your digital rules? Because if Cole is going to be spending time at your house, I just want to make sure he doesn't do anything that upsets you or that's different than what you want. What's it look like? And
putting it on, it's almost like you're putting it on their plate.
You're giving them the opportunity to share, and then that gives you a door, just listening to what they say, to say, oh yeah, we do some of that too. We also do some of this, and you can extend it a little bit. So I think there are some very intentional ways that they're not being deceptive or conniving. You're just simply trying to find the best way to have a conversation. And what you find is you're probably both wanting the same thing here. So that's why, I spent I don't know how many pages around just these types of questions that we can ask to get that conversation started.
And I think too, like I said before, there's so much of a lean in when these topics come up. The ability to create allies there or opportunities, So we saw the rise of that tin can phone, the landline phone that you can use an app to, this is going to sound like an ad for them. You can use an app to control who your kids can call, who can call in, but it's a landline, it's the whole thing. But they need to have other friends that have it to help make it where they can call them. And so this past Christmas, we got a bunch of moms. I even think they have a discount for bulk phone purchases. Moms of our friend group for one of our kids. And I think a bunch of those kids got these landlines for Christmas. And it was hearing him answer the phone, running upstairs when the phone would ring. I thought, man, that takes me back. Oh, yeah. Being a kid and the phone would ring for me. Oh my gosh.
Right.
So you find some unlikely allies, I think, when you're able to have these conversations.
Yeah, and it's a guarantee that it's a call for him because it's ringing on that phone. They're not calling you. So all the more reason that he's excited.
My wife called the other day and I happened to be by the phone, so I answered it. And I was kind of like, why are you calling me on this phone? She knew it would ring in the house. So there you go. Right.
Yeah, but get your attention. Exactly.
And so it felt so weird to be tethered to the wall.
Yeah. So. But that's, I think, what a lot of parents need to know. There are more and more tools out there. We don't have to be burdened by this sort of binary, iPhone or not. There are other options that kind of stand in that gap now that do bring that risk down and teach our kids some really important skills, like how to order a pizza. To me, that was always a rite of passage as a kid, is you had to know how to order a pizza. You had the courage and the tools to call and place an order. And we just kind of went through that with my sons. That was kind of a big deal. I left him my debit card and some instructions like, hey, bud, I'm out. You want to eat? You got to order this bugger. And he did it. He did a great job. So
what did he get on it? I mean, did you come home with there anchovies on it? You're like, oh, you messed it up.
there was nothing left. He was hungry. So
oh, man. The landscape, as we kind of talked about before, you talked about the layers. I thought that was really interesting. And one of the ones that is, I think, the biggest is going to be the legislative layer. That's going to get these big companies to act. We have seen in Australia, when it comes to social media, a willingness to put some safeguards in place that tech companies said we can never handle, and then they handled it. Do you feel legislatively like we're seeing momentum, and if not, what are the obstacles?
Well, so here's the tension, because as soon as you have this conversation about laws and bans, you have this rising up of voices that are like, keep the government out, parents need to be parents. And I get all of that. Mark, I think you and I agree. We want to be the primary decision makers for our kids. I don't want someone in DC telling me what I can and can't parent. That's my job. But we also live in a society where not every child has a parent with the tools or the ability to prevent some of these harms. And so I want laws that create a speed bump that an intentional parent can get over, but that is tall enough to prevent harm to a child. Like, that's the tension that I'm always trying to find here. So I saw what you did there. The Australia law is a great start. It's not perfect. And even the framing around it, and you and I recently had a conversation about this, I think the framing around it is exactly the way the big tech wants us to frame it. They want us to frame it as a ban between kids and something that they need. This is actually a ban on violation of child, like, digital safety and rights. Like, it's a ban on companies having inappropriate access to children, not a ban on children having something that's inappropriate for childhood. Like, that's the dynamic that we've got to spin this around to say, wait a minute, why did we start to believe that Snapchat was good for a 15-year-old? And now we have to ban that out. Like, we've just got to change the way that we think about this. We've believed the marketing, and we all kind of now say their lines back. Same thing in schools. Like, this isn't a phone-free school movement. This is a give kids a focused education. Let's give them back a distraction-free environment. Let's give them back the ability to look at each other and have a raucous cafeteria because they're actually having fun with each other. Like, these are experiences that I want to give as gifts to children. And instead of framing it, that way, I think we often do it the other way. So I love that Australia is doing this because it creates these kind of tipping points. Jonathan and I just talked about is sort of the same thing that happened with the Berlin Wall. I think for decades we thought, why is that thing there? But nobody did anything about it. We all knew it was a bad idea and it was horrible. All it took was for a couple of sections to fall, and then just boom, everyone was like, all right, let's get this thing down. We're done. And it was like scales that fell and everything made sense. And I feel like those are some of the tipping points that we're starting to see in other countries like France, Indonesia, and Denmark that are also entertaining very similar approaches. The UK, right? I don't know. I don't think it's going to ever happen in the US. I see more progress at the state level. I see more niche surgical approaches in the US, whether it's with CSAM or deep fakes or AI companions, just because it's so hard to find bipartisan agreement on anything these days. But, I'm still hopeful. We're starting to see some things.
Yeah, I remember watching, it was a news story from, I don't know, might have been the 70s or 80s when seatbelt laws were first passed.
Yeah.
And the way these people talked about seatbelt laws.
Wow, yeah.
It just blew my mind how much of an infringement they thought it was in their freedoms. I mean, now we look at that, most of us, as this universal good that has saved countless lives. You think of the heartache that people have been spared because of seatbelt laws. But when it first came out, when these laws were first passed, people, a lot of them lost their minds. I imagine there were a lot of folks who thought making it illegal for kids to buy cigarettes was the same thing. I don't know anybody right now who thinks, yes, a 12-year-old should be able to walk into 7-Eleven and leave with a pack of Marlboro Lights.
I know it. I know it. No, you're exactly
So
right.
some of it is the tipping point on that, and you create new normals, but it is funny. It's like resist, and then it happens, and then the floodgates come open.
That's right. And it's just we're the ones that have experienced it the one way, and then to take it away, of course, we're the ones that are going to fight back, but then the next generation will come around. Because today, when you see somebody without a seatbelt on, you almost look at them in disdain. Like, how could you? Like a child roaming around the backseat of a car without a seatbelt, you're looking up the number for Child Protective Services. You're so abhorred and offended that they would do that, right? And what a shift that is from some of the things that, you've described. And I'm not saying that there are extremes to both sides of this. I'm not
absolutely
trying to promote one or the other, but it's evidence as to kind of how fickle we are sometimes as a society, in terms of these things. So I expect resistance. We've been trained by billion-dollar marketing machines to love this thing. And I think we're starting to wake up to that a little bit.
What do you think a realistic utopia would look like with the current landscape? Because, maybe realistic utopia is an oxymoron, but what would that look like?
Well, I think it starts by, and I think there are some ways to do this. If we're going to protect kids online, we've got to figure out a privacy protecting way to separate children from adults online. Everything else in the world sort of spins on that. Where do you need an ID? How do you need to be a certain age in order to do something? And we've got to find ways to do that online so that we can treat children like children and adults like adults and make those kinds of decisions, because that's what's so complicated in all these mixed content, mixed age spaces, is trying to honor one without offending the other and protecting one without violating rights of the other. It's super complicated. And so, a lot of that is starting to happen related to pornography. And, there are pros and cons to some of that. Again, we've got to find privacy protecting ways to do that, zero knowledge proof kind of ways. But there are ways. And so I really want to get to a spot where we can separate children from adults. And then I want to get to, and this kind of goes back to my Ernst & Young days and why what happened after Enron was so effective, was we need to create a liability structure that gets through the corporate shield and makes it personally liable when a certain set of standards are not followed. So that starts with creating a set of design standards that companies who are releasing products that could be used by children have to adhere to. There's a whole audit process that goes on around this. Just like we're going to create a whole new sort of service sector here that will audit companies against these technical design standards, give them opinions on whether or not they're compliant. And if they're found to be out of compliance, then guess what? You can hold CEOs and CTOs personally liable for fraudulently stating that you were compliant with these standards. That's exactly what happened after Enron, which is why we haven't had another Enron. The SEC went after CFOs and CEOs and said, listen, if you issue financial statements, quarterly or annual, and they're fraudulent, you don't have financial reporting controls in place, I will hold you personally liable, not company, but you CEO, you CFO. And again, liability made everybody line up. So if I could just have a couple of things, those are the things that I would want. I think you would see companies line up instantly if you were going to go after what they value most, and that is their bottom line.
Well, and that's maybe an end around to specific legislation that gets into some murky freedom of speech waters, some First Amendment waters, is if you have some other kind of constructs that, okay, well, if you're adhering to this, then some of the other stuff kind of falls in line, and the liability part is enough. These are really complicated issues that people who followed this stuff know all about. But I did hear Scott Galloway on the Pivot podcast one time bring up an idea that definitely I thought was compelling. He talked about, I'm trying to remember how he phrased it, but you're attaching the age to the device. So when you get a phone, kid gets a device, that age gets locked into the hardware. So when you go to sign up for Snapchat, you're not putting in my birth date is 1983 so you can convince them that you're 40 some odd year old. The device is communicating that age. And if you sell the device, then you do a factory reset. And if it's ever been age gated under to sell it, it's got to have parental, whatever. There's ways it can be done. I thought that was really compelling because it gets around some of the things. And at the end of the day, you and I have talked about this too. It may not stop all of it, but it stops a lot of it. And it changes the norm of how people assume the age verification stuff's handled.
Yeah, that device level knowledge is a very compelling approach to this because most of our devices have a pretty, at least with assurance, 95% assurance idea as to the age, just based on how we interact with it. Have you attached a credit card to it? Most of us during the iPhone setup process through the App Store attached a credit card for purchases. That's a pretty good indicator that an adult set up this phone. Right away, you've got a cue. Something that is then maybe shareable. It doesn't have to be the exact age or any personally identifiable information, but a signal to other digital spaces that this is not a minor. Therefore, you can treat them as if they're not a minor. All of those things already exist. We just need to compel, in this case, the manufacturers, be it the operating system manufacturers, right? Apple and Android and so forth. But those are all things we can do. We just need the will to do it. So,
well, I've got my phone convinced that I'm 39 eternally. So
that's right. And next year, same.
Holding on.
That's right. Holding on, brother. I'm with you. I got a birthday in a week and a half, so I'm right there with you. I'll be turning 49 again.
Yes, again, hold on to that. At the end of the day, you have been doing this work with Protect Young Eyes for a while now. We talked about your history, your kind of life before you started this company and the kind of work you're doing. I know you've seen a lot of growth, a lot of attention, despite the fact that you have to do this kind of work because you think there's a need out there. How excited are you to be doing this and where you see the growth potential?
Well, I feel as though, at least for the next 3 or 4 years, this is what I've been called to do. It was about 2 years ago that I made the commitment that I was going to sprint to 55 doing this. And so I made a pretty significant, change to drop a great job. This was sort of growing on the side, Mark. As you know and I've kind of talked about my history. And so this is what I feel compelled to do, leveraging some of that professional experience. And now is the time. It took us 10 years to figure out social media. We've maybe got 10 to 18 months to figure out AI before it becomes so entwined in all of those layers that I just described that it's going to be very difficult to undo. And I'm more motivated than ever to help as many parents as possible to start making some of these decisions for their kids. And working with, awesome individuals like you and your wife and others, to battle in some of those other layers. We really need all layers. Wicked problems demand a multifaceted approach. And I believe technology is one of those that needs help in all of the layers. We also spend quite a bit of time at schools. We maybe do 300 to 400 presentations at schools throughout the year, trying to educate in the classroom, in gymnasiums, getting kids to know what tools and what policies schools can have to protect during the 7 hours that they control, but also places of worship. I don't want to underestimate, the power that some pastors and others can have from the pulpit and other places of worship just to compel families to be making choices that are for the good of families. I think that's a spot, honestly, of those layers I've described that has done a woeful job. Actually a horrible job of stewarding the message around thriving when it comes to humanity. And I'm pretty vocal about that in my own church and in other circles that I speak in. And so we definitely, I see some movement starting, and I'm going to keep pressing on. And, I just want families to know, others who are listening to this, whether you're a parent or a grandparent or a professional or kind of a mix of all of that, that we want to be the spot where when you're not sure, start with us. We want to have that first step for you. We've got guides. We've got app reviews. You don't know how to set up your smart TV to protect your kid from watching YouTube in the middle of the night. We got your back. Like that kind of blocking and tackling, that's exactly where we want to be so that you're not frustrated.
Is that what you would, maybe a parent who's listened today to this and said, hey, I'd love to find more information. How can I go about some of this kind of stuff? Is that where you direct them? Obviously, your website, Protect Young Eyes, is a great place to start. Any other recommendations?
Well, I mean, that is the beginning of the journey that will then take you down a path of start here. And there's a tab at the top that says start here. And it'll move you from either I've got enough to be self-directed, I can read a few things and do it on my own, or maybe I need some of that Geek Squad-like one-on-one support. So we have a small digital coaching community called The Table where parents can come to this. Yes, it's digital. It's not a real table, but we want you to come to the table. And I've got people that help one-on-one to give you that assistance if necessary. And then, of course, as you said, trying to scale this message out through the book that'll come out in June, just doing whatever we can from that organic, ground up, grassroots in the homes, help as many of them as possible. So that's the spot. Start at the website. I mean, ironically, like a lot of organizations, I'm trying to use social media for as much good as possible, but that feels a little bit ironic to end with, hey, go find us on social media, since I just spent 55 minutes bashing it. But we are trying to use it for as much good as I can. And I would love to share information with you there too, if that's what's helpful. So.
Yeah. Well, using tech to fight tech.
That's right.
A lot of folks are figuring out how to do that. Well, you mentioned the book. It is 5 Habits of the Tech-Ready Family, Raising Wise Kids in a Wild Digital World. June 16th is when I believe it's available. If folks are catching it before then, they can pre-order it. I hope it is a smashing success. And I'm thrilled for you, and especially given how hard you worked on it.
Thank you. Yeah. Somebody who has written books, a friend of mine, she said, Chris, get ready. You're going to hate it before you're done. And she was right. But then I fell back in love with it when I did the audiobook and had the chance to read it out loud. I, spent a couple of days in the studio reading it, and it felt right. And I hope that it is that just very practical advice for parents, that whether it's AI or pornography or gaming or social media, the reason I frame it in these habits, these principles, is they stand above the whack-a-mole. They stand above the specific apps. These are truths that are going to be helpful no matter what comes next that we can't even fathom. And I mean, that's my promise is, through reading it, that's what I want parents to experience.
Well, as a parent who really believes in the importance of these messages and getting them out there to as many people as possible, thank you for all the work you're doing and your insight. And thank you for being here today and sharing it with listeners, man. I really appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you, Mark. Always appreciate our conversations.
Well, again, I just want to thank Chris for his insight and expertise and for joining me today. And I want to thank you for listening and hope that you will please don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, write a review. I always love hearing from you guys. Of course, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a good day.